Welcome back to Klepper's Corner, Today in History. Today, June 6th, gives us a beautiful little sampler platter of humanity's favorite hobby. Pretending chaos is actually a plan. Preferably with a seal, a crown, a treaty, or a really confident guy holding a clipboard. Segment 1, and the paperwork of absolute power. June 6th starts with the Western Roman Empire in 445 doing what every collapsing institution does right before the walls fall down, issuing a memo. Emperor Valentinian III, ruling an empire with more holes than a gas station sponge, stepped into a church fight between Pope Leo I and Bishop Hilary of Arles. Hilary had been acting like the regional manager of Gaul, appointing bishops, removing bishops, basically running ecclesiastical HR with a sword tucked under the desk. Pope Leo said, absolutely not. There is one boss, and he lives in Rome. So Valentinian backed Leo with imperial law, meaning disagreeing with the Pope was no longer just a theological dispute, it was also a state problem. That is a stunning bit of outsourcing. Rome could not keep the barbarians out, but it could still make sure a bishop answered his mail. And then, centuries later, the same pattern shows up in Paris in 1242, where religious authority did not debate the Talmud so much as put it on trial, with the verdict already warming up by the fireplace. 24 cartloads of handwritten Jewish scholarship were burned, because nothing says confidence in your faith like being terrified of books. Then, in Seville, in 1391, sermons turned into mobs, mobs turned into massacre, and forced conversions created the converso population Spain would later obsess over with the Inquisition. The irony is savage. Power kept trying to solve uncertainty by stamping it, burning it, or baptizing it under threat. And every time, it created a bigger, darker bureaucracy to manage the damage. Segment 2, and crowns are just hats with public relations. A good chunk of June 6th history is powerful people staging legitimacy like a halftime show. In 1522, Holy Roman Emperor Charles V and King Henry VIII made a spectacular grand entry into London, all pageants, silk, armor, and diplomatic theater. It was meant to show France that England and the Habsburg Empire were now best friends, which in royal language means we currently hate the same person. They even floated a marriage between Charles and Princess Mary, because nothing says stable foreign policy like assigning a child to solve Europe. Of course, the whole alliance later curdled when Henry wanted to annul his marriage to Catherine of Aragon, Charles's aunt, and Charles used his influence to block it. So the parade celebrating unity helped set up the divorce drama that helped create the English Reformation. That is pageantry with a delayed explosion. Then jump to Beijing in 1644, when Prince Regent Dorgan and the Manchus entered the city after Ming General Wu Sangui opened the Great Wall to them, hoping they would help restore order. Instead, they took the throne and founded the Qing dynasty. That is not calling a locksmith. That is handing your house keys to a rival moving company. And in India, in 1674, Shivaji Maharaj crowned himself Chhatrapati at Raigad, transforming from rebel chieftain into sovereign ruler through ritual, lineage, sacred water, gold, artillery, and enough ceremony to make a modern inauguration look like a town council ribbon cutting. The shared lesson is simple. Power is never just power. It needs costumes, witnesses, music, incense, military backup, and one guy saying, yes, this umbrella is legally significant. Segment 3, and the foreign savior problem. June 6th also specializes in people inviting help and receiving ownership. The Qing conquest began because Wu Sangui faced rebels on one side and Manchu armies on the other, and chose the option that seemed least immediately fatal. It worked, in the narrow sense that he survived the week. Unfortunately, he also helped end the Ming Order and opened the door to nearly 3 centuries of Manchu rule. History is full of decisions that look practical in the moment and then spend 300 years clearing their throat. Napoleon tried a more direct version in 1808. He lured Spain's royal family to Bayonne, squeezed out their claims, and installed his brother Joseph Bonaparte as King of Spain. Joseph arrived with reforms that included ending torture and trimming noble privilege, which sounds fine until you remember he came wrapped in French bayonets and the smell of kidnapping. The Spanish public rejected him with uprisings, guerrilla war, and a nickname, Pepe Botella, accusing him of being a drunk even though he barely drank. It was false, but politically devastating, proving again that satire can be an insurgency with better branding. Napoleon thought he was tidying up Iberia. Instead, he got the Peninsular War, the Spanish ulcer, and a legitimacy crisis that rippled into Latin American independence. June 6th is not subtle here. When a ruler says, "I am here to restore order," check whether he brought luggage, cousins, and a new constitution. Because sometimes the emergency solution is just conquest, wearing a helpful little name tag. Segment 4, and when the ground starts filing complaints. Not every disaster on June 6th came from kings, popes, or empires. Sometimes the planet itself walks into the meeting and says, "I have edits." In 1912, Nova Rupta erupted on the Alaska Peninsula, sending ash 20 miles into the sky and turning daylight into sulfurous blackout. People on Kodiak thought ash was snow, which is understandable, because when the apocalypse arrives, the human brain first tries to categorize it as weather. The eruption dumped more material than all other historic Alaskan eruptions combined, drained the magma chamber under Mount Katmai, collapsed a summit, created the Valley of 10,000 Smokes, and cooled the northern hemisphere by about 2 degrees Fahrenheit. That is not a local incident. That is the Earth accidentally opening a global thermostat app. People fled to the U.S. revenue cutter Manning, while Captain Kirtland Perry refused to sail away unless everyone could go. Some residents prayed in church, others drank in saloons, and Perry shut the saloons down, because apparently, even during volcanic darkness, someone has to say, "Folks, let us not meet the end times hammered." 6 years later, on June 6, 1918, humans were making their own hell at Belleau Wood. Lieutenant Junior Grade Whedon E. Osborne, a Navy dental surgeon, repeatedly ran into combat to rescue wounded Marines and was killed carrying an injured officer. A dentist became a battlefield hero, which is a reminder that courage rarely checks the job description. One June 6th shows nature burying the world in ash. The other shows humans doing it with artillery. Somehow, the dentist is the part that gives you hope. Segment 5, and lies, fear, and falling blocks. By the 20th century, June 6th becomes a masterclass in how fragile reality can be. In 1944, Operation Overlord sent Allied troops into Normandy, but the invasion survived partly because a Spanish double agent, Juan Pujol Garcia, better known as Agent Garbo, convinced Nazi Germany that Normandy was a fake-out, and the real invasion would come at Pas de Calais. He invented an entire network of imaginary spies, which is usually called lying, unless it helps defeat Hitler, in which case we call it intelligence work. The Germans trusted him so much that even after D-Day, they held divisions away from Normandy, waiting for an invasion that existed only in Garbo's inbox. In 1966, James Meredith set out on his march against fear and was shot on a Mississippi highway. But the attempt to stop him expanded the march into a national civil rights moment, drawing leaders like Martin Luther King Jr. and Stokely Carmichael, and helping push the phrase Black Power into the center of the movement. In 1968, Robert F. Kennedy died on June 6th after being shot in Los Angeles. Another blow in a year already drowning in grief. And then, in 1984, Alexei Pajitnov released Tetris, a Soviet puzzle game about trying to make order from falling chaos, while the system speeds up until you lose. Honestly, as metaphors for the modern age go, that one is rude. June 6th gives us invasions, movements, assassinations, and finally, a little block game that says, do your best. The pieces will keep coming. In conclusion, June 6th is a reminder that history often arrives dressed as certainty. A decree, a coronation, a rescue mission, a battle plan, a reform, a march, a game. But underneath, it is usually people improvising under pressure, hoping the next move does not collapse the whole board. And then Tetris shows up and says, "Bad news, the board was the point."